As Israel and Hamas agree a ceasefire deal, we speak to a Palestinian in Gaza and to the family of a hostage on what it means for them. And here in the UK, with more clashes over the economy today, the dividing lines of this parliament are becoming clear. So, which party leader is getting it right 6 months on from polling day? Good evening. This is Newsnight, brought to you live every weeknight from Broadcasting House with the best insights and interviews. Our panel tonight, former Labour Shadow Cabinet member John Ashworth, the pollster Luke Trill and assistant comment editor at The Telegraph Madeline Grant. And of course, we have Nick. We are going to be taking stock of the party leaders' performances 6 months after the UK general election. But first, an historic day in the Middle East as a peace deal between Israel and Hamas is announced. Shortly, we'll be hearing from a Palestinian living in Gaza and also from an Israeli whose family member is one of those held hostage by Hamas. But first, the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is with me tonight. Lise, thank you so much for being here on Newsnight. Just tell us why now and really what does this mean?
Well, this means to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are living in the midst of utter ruin and the fear of even greater loss. And for Israelis who've loved ones, they may be alive, they may be dead, but loved ones are still being held in Gaza. Tonight is a moment of rare celebration, of cautious hope, and in a war of all wars, where from the very beginning, from October the 7th, 2023, when Hamas went on the rampage across southern Israel, the word unprecedented has been used. And we have seen month in, month out, 15 long months, a war which has been unprecedented in every way, most of all for the pain and suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and for this raw wound in Israel about when will this war end. It is a very complex political deal, a three-phase deal. And what we are mainly hearing tonight is that there is great optimism about the first phase of the deal. Let us say the easy part in a very tough deal. It was tough to negotiate. It will be even tougher to implement. And there is still a possibility that it will all unravel. But in the first phase, 33 hostages, the women, the children, the female soldiers, will be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli forces will withdraw out of the populated areas of the Gaza Strip, and Gazans will begin to go home to what's left of their homes in the north. But will this mean an end to the war? That will be the second phase, and that's when the political problems could start.
Stay with us, Lise, because we will talk further about some of the complexities of this ceasefire deal. But I've been talking to Imad Kideh, who is a Palestinian with a visual impairment. He's living in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, and I asked him what the reaction was there.
Since they started to mention it in the channel and news, everyone has started to chant, everyone has started to cheer, everyone has started to connect his family members, his loved ones. Everyone was really happy. Everyone was really chanting. Everyone was hugging each other in order to express how a great love they got inside their heart because of this kind of very happy moment they got at the moment. So the guys here were really celebrating in this kind of ceasefire as it is Eid for people here. Anyways, like everyone hope that the ceasefire agreement is gonna bring a lot of hope, a lot of beautiful memories, despite of the whole challenges they live at the moment, specifically the lack of the food, the lack of the drink, everything is gonna be rebirth, I think, so soon, as they are talking about the aid will reach Gaza, will arrive Gaza from the first day of the ceasefire.
Of course, it's come after 15 months of war. What has that been like for you and your family?
For me, some of my family relatives I've lost. 4 of my family relatives and 3 of my cousins, they were spending their time in the coffee shop. This coffee shop was targeted by one of the missiles and it's all distracted. Was really sad news. I've seen the deep in front of me with different colors. I've lost my nephew, was about 15 years old, and he has been killed. Was really sad news. It cut my heart into pieces. So this kind of stuff was really difficult, even though I've lost my house.
So you say you're going to go back to where your house was, but do you know what awaits you there? What's that like? What's the psychological impact of that on you?
My house is near to the Israeli border. The majority of the houses there are distracted, even though the trees were taken over from the land. So I think it's going to be a very dramatic scenes we will have there, but what we can do, this is something we are under at the moment.
Imad, what toll has the last 15 months taken on you?
Each of the moments actually was like thousands of years of different colors of death, different colors of torturement. To be close until this level from death is really difficult then. So we thank God for each of the surviving moments, and we thank people helped us in this horrible war that we witnessed. Yeah.
Lastly, Imad, and what is your hope now? Are you hopeful for the future?
Gaza people believe in love and peace. We wanna have our own rights. We wanna live in dignity. We want to practice our normal life, and we want to be successful people building our future. God willing.
Imad Kide, thank you so much for talking to Newsnight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
At least you can hear there from Imad Kide. It's the cautious hope that you were talking about, but there is caution because there are still so many unanswered questions about what next for Gaza when it comes to rebuilding, reconstruction, and of course governance.
And even coming to terms with the loss, generations of families have been wiped out in the Gaza Strip. This war has been unparalleled in so many ways. Record number of journalists being killed, record numbers of aid workers, the people who have moved sometimes as many as 10 times from one tent to the next. And now you could just feel like speaking about a future. But yes, the future is going to be very uncertain. Who's going to pay for the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip? The Gulf states, who have the wealth to do so and possibly the will to do so, won't do it unless they are sure that this time it's going to work, that there won't be another war, that this will all come crashing down. They want to, and for them, it means a pathway to a Palestinian state. And when the Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank speak of their future, they also believe it has to lead to a Palestinian state. But that is not on Prime Minister Netanyahu's agenda. That is not on, certainly not on the agenda of his far right-wing supporters, his cabinet ministers, who even tonight are saying this deal is a catastrophe, that the war cannot end. And so it's a fragile hope, but it is a rare hope. And we still don't, when people will go back to their homes, we've been hearing today Palestinians saying, I just want to go and see what's left of my homes. But it's going to be relief and happiness mixed with agony, because for most of them, there's nothing left. And many of them have been separated from their loved ones, so they'll go north. And will their parents still be alive? What will be left? It's a whole the roller coaster of emotions.
You mentioned it there, Lisa. You said this is quite clearly about people. This has had a huge impact on so many people, but it is also about politics. And this was announced during Joe Biden's term in the White House, but we are days away from Donald Trump taking over in the White House. He is to some degree attempting to take credit for part of this. Do you think that's justified?
This is, again, is another unprecedented part of this. And we've heard from President Joe Biden saying that you've never had this before. Two administrations, one which hasn't even been sworn into office yet, is sitting at the same table. They've never had that before, but it does seem to have made the difference in pushing it over the line. President Biden has made it clear that the deal which has been agreed, and they're still discussing tonight some of the details, it has to be said, was on the table since May. It has been through the administration of Joe Biden. But the style of the envoys that President Trump has sent, basically we understand that Witzkoff, who's the new Middle East envoy appointed by President Trump, at every meeting, he's a real estate mogul. He basically said, by the 20th. President Trump wants it done by the 20th. You have to get it done by the 20th. And pressure was put not just on Hamas, but on Prime Minister Netanyahu as well.
Lise, thank you so much for talking us through it all. And later we will hear from an Israeli whose family member is one of those still held hostage by Hamas, with all of the uncertainty around that. But now to UK politics, and 6 months on from the general election, and the dividing lines between the political parties are becoming ever clearer. We are going to assess the performance of their leaders. Now, Nick, you've got a ringside seat in Parliament. How do you see the tectonic plates as having shifted?
Well, Alex, food for thought for our very learned panel tonight. And as you say, we are 6 months in from the general election, and we've got a pretty good idea of the lie of the land. So we have a government with a whopping parliamentary majority, John will like that, but which is struggling to find its footing. We have an official opposition under a new leader that is having a hard life about life in opposition. We have a third party in Parliament, at least in perma-smile mode, after the Lib Dems won 72 seats. And we have a new kid on the block, or maybe Nigel Farage is a chip off the old block, who appears to have the wind in his sails. And all of that, to keep that metaphor going, or am I mixing my metaphor? All of that makes a bit of a whirlwind of an atmosphere at Westminster, where Keir Starmer has started the new year buffeted by tricky financial markets. Kemi Badenoch not exactly knocking it out of the park in Parliament as William Hague did. We have a sketch writer here who can give us a view on that. And Nigel Farage thinking he has a golden opportunity to scoop up votes from the two main parties.
You spend your days prowling around the corridors of power, Nick. What is the mood that you are picking up within those parties, among the members?
Well, I'm sorry to have to tell John that there are some pretty long faces on the Labour side. One complaint is that Keir Starmer is sort of struggling to tell a story, a compelling story of what his government is all about. Is he making an emotional connection? But others are saying you've got to understand the very difficult inheritance. It was put to me like this. In 1997, the economy was improving, but public services were in a mess. In 2010, public services were in a great place, but the economy was not. And in 2024, both the economy and the public services are in a bad place. On the Tory side, some concern about the bluntness of Kemi Badenoch's language. I was struck by one senior figure in the party told me shortly after her election, that's what happens when you have a free thinker as leader, but we have to support her. And Kemi Badenoch says, look, I need to move very steadily. No point in making promises that you can't keep.
Nick, thank you. So, Luke Trill, Nick is in touch with the mood of the parties in Westminster and the members, but you are a pollster. You are in touch with the mood of the country, you tell us. So, how is Keir Starmer faring? Nick talks about long faces on the Labour benches. Is that reflected in what you're hearing?
It is, and it has been quite striking that Keir Starmer's personal popularity has basically plummeted since the general election. It's worth saying he was never particularly popular. You know, he wasn't never Blair levels of popularity. In fact, we recorded him at plus 11 net popularity after the election. So positive, but not hugely. That has basically steadily declined since. He's now at minus 39.
And
so
is that reflected in the party's performance in the polls too?
It is. We had a poll this week and we found that basically you have three parties now, all within 1%.
I think we can actually take a look at the research that you've put out on this, which shows just how close it is. There we go, the headline voting intention. So you can see the Conservatives 25, Labour 24 and Reform UK 24.
And that has been the story since the election. You've had a big drop in the Labour vote, about 10 points. You've got the Conservatives basically holding steady. They had that performance in July, haven't improved on it, and Reform, the big gainers, now up at 24%. That's up about 10 points from their general election performance. They are the ones with momentum at the moment.
Jonathan Ashworth, that must make you worried when you look at that poll.
Well, I'm no longer a frontline politician, but I can still...
But you're still pretty wedded to the Labour
But I can still give you the classic
fortunes.
politician's line that the only poll that matters is election day, and that is not a get out. There's truth in that line because
let me finish.
But the point is this: in a general election, voters are forced to make a choice about which party they want to form a government. Outside of a general election, voters will express their disappointment about particular policies that a government is or isn't pursuing in an opinion poll. When a choice is put to the fore, I suspect you'll see the opinion polls in a slightly different shape. So that's not to say I am complacent about the picture at the moment. It is indeed a very fractured electoral landscape.
Are you worried, though? Are you worried?
No, this government said it is going to make some tough and unpopular decisions. If you're making tough decisions, by definition, you are not going to please all of the voters. But the government feels that it has to make those tough decisions because essentially it inherited a burning skip in the public finances. And that is why it has pursued policies which are not universally popular, like changes to the winter fuel payment or tax changes. But they did say they're going to be unpopular.
But just briefly, John, on the point that Nick was making, and actually Gus O'Donnell, who's a former very senior civil servant, made this point on Radio 4 today. Is it not just the policies? Does Keir Starmer have the ability to explain the reason why, the story behind this, tell the country why he's doing what he's doing? Are you confident he's got that?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes the way in which we talk about politics, we talk as if this is, you know, we've just watched the first half in the FA Cup final at Wembley, and we're now all up in the box offering our opinion on who had the best goal and why did somebody mess up that free kick or that corner. Actually, politics is about policies, and this government is introducing changes to the National Health Service, backed up by funding. It's introduced an increase in the living wage. That's a big boost to the earnings for some of the poorest people in society. This week it was talking about the transformation that AI, data and tech will bring to our economy. It is policies that matter in the end, and Keir Starmer is getting on with an important policy agenda.
Luke Trill, you might expect, when there is a government that's taken a dip in the polls, as your research suggests, that it is the official opposition that benefits. It doesn't appear from what you've shown us that that's necessarily the case right now.
No, and so what it looks like is happening is Labour has become more unpopular, but the Tory brand hasn't recovered from the general election. You know, people are still saying, well, they're the guys we booted out last July. We don't want them back. And so that is allowing Nigel Farage to pick up some of the none of the above vote at the moment. And the really interesting thing is the people in focus groups who used to say, well, I like Nigel Farage, he says it like it is, but I don't want him as Prime Minister, are now saying, well, I don't like the Tories. Labour have taken away my mum's winter fuel allowance, so we may as well try that guy.
Madeleine Grant, what do you think that the Conservatives are thinking about that? Because we know that Kemi Badenoch went through the leadership contest and said she wasn't going to come up with a huge policy platform yet. Has she left a vacuum? Too much of a vacuum, potentially?
I think she definitely has left far too much of a vacuum there because, you know, already with these polls, including Luke's poll that we talked about just now, you have this, for the Tories, quite an alarming occurrence where it can be argued that they're not the official party of the right. I mean, obviously they are in Parliament because Reform have 5 seats, but if it really does get to the point where it looks like you have a better chance of ousting an unpopular governing party and Reform, rather than the Tory party, is the vehicle for doing that, then that absolutely strikes a blow to the heart of well, the future, the existential future of the Conservative Party. The mood within the party, I think, there are some who get this. There are others who would say Kemi Badenoch is just getting started, give her time.
But she's only been in since November.
Yes, that's right. But it does create a vacuum when Reform are making such inroads into their vote. They're kind of, you know, eating the Tories' breakfast as we speak. So I do think that a refusal to commit to anything more than a fluffy vision is already hurting them, actually.
It's interesting that Kemi Badenoch says the lesson of the last few years is you make promises that you can't make and you crush trust, and I'm not going to fall into that trap, she says. And she's also saying, let's be open about the mistakes that the Conservatives made in government. And she's making a very interesting speech tomorrow. We've just had the extract of that released in the last few minutes, saying, I acknowledge the Conservative Party made mistakes. And listen to this, from a Brexiteer, we announced that we would leave the European Union before we had a plan for growth outside the EU. That's quite an admission to make. So she's essentially saying, admit to the mistakes, do building blocks, but the problem is, as leader of the opposition, you've got to make noise.
Yeah, and also we had, you know, previously, many Tories will say, oh, look, Keir Starmer wasn't too forthcoming in his policies. He didn't commit to a great deal before the election. But, of course, he was the alternative.
He did commit to a lot. He just jumped them all as he became Prime Minister.
But now you have Reform. You can't really get away with that anymore.
Well, we've mentioned Reform. Yes. I want to talk about Nigel Farage, Luke Trill, because there are plenty in the party that talk up their own prospects about being in government in 2029. Do you think that is credible? Or is this, to the point that John Ashworth made at the very beginning, are polls different to votes, and should we treat them with that degree of scepticism?
Well, look, I think Jonathan is right. People are using polls at the moment to express their frustration and discontent. I think what is surprising is the speed at which that has happened. The polls look much more like a midterm. If Reform were at the levels they are now in 2027, I wouldn't be as surprised. I think it's the pace of it. But that poses a challenge for Nigel Farage now, which is, can he withstand the scrutiny that comes with not being a party of protest, but a potential Prime Minister? And I think particularly on economic policy, I think there's room for Labour and the Conservatives to actually push some of the potential contradictions in Reform's message.
John Ashworth, is that what people are looking at?
I think this is a really important point, because I noticed over the Christmas holiday that Nigel Farage had done an interview with the Daily Telegraph, where he was talking about introducing charging into the National Health Service. And what struck me is that he made that comment and it went totally unremarked upon in broader political discourse. And I thought that, you know, really my colleagues in the Labour Party should have been jumping on that and pointing out Reform or potential Labour voters who might be thinking about Reform in Bolton, Bolsover and Barnsley, that if you're voting Nigel Farage, you're voting for a man who wants to introduce charging into the NHS.
Are you saying that perhaps there are colleagues in the Labour Party now that are not paying close enough attention?
Well, I mean, look,
that maybe should be responding in a different way.
People are allowed to have a Christmas holiday. But the point being, more broadly, is that I think the political parties now, and this is actually the Tory party as well, really need to be putting Nigel Farage under sustained scrutiny, because I think he will wilt when he is put under policy scrutiny, because I don't believe, and I'd be interested if Luke's done any polling on it, I do not believe that voters in the sorts of constituencies that decide general elections want to be charged for treatment at their local hospital.
No, I mean, the NHS is a total third rail. If you propose charging, you will not become Prime Minister. But I think the interesting thing, as you say, is sometimes you listen to Reform voters in focus groups and they almost sound, apart from immigration, they sound like Corbynites on the economy very often. They don't like the system, they're big business, they want more spending. So if he sticks with some of his more previous libertarian stances, he's not going to be able to build that coalition he needs.
Is there another potential point of jeopardy for Nigel Farage in that he has hitched his own fortunes pretty closely to Elon Musk and Donald Trump, of course, incoming president of the US? If they do things that prove unpopular, could that then play out for Reform UK?
I think voters in Britain are actually quite parochial. They tend to focus on what's happened here. And I thought the more interesting thing was when it came to the Tommy Robinson issue. Farage said, you know what, I'm not going to play Musk's game here. I'm going to distance myself from Tommy Robinson. And that was quite important. That, to me, showed that he is serious when he says he wants to grow the party. He doesn't want to keep them as a party of sort of 15%.
But I think the danger both for the Conservatives and for Reform is I don't genuinely believe that people think that Nigel Farage can form a government at the next general election. But what we could have, and this is what Suella Braverman was talking about this week, is some form of Conservative Reform coalition, sort of, you know, Kemi Badenoch in Nigel Farage's top pocket. Well, I don't believe the voters want that coalition of chaos either.
I think Nigel Farage wants that coalition.
In fairness, Nigel Farage and I think Kemi Badenoch have been pretty clear it's that idea they're flirting with.
Kemi Badenoch's strategy, which at the moment is not allowing a cigarette paper between her and Nigel Farage on some pretty totemic issues, is to ensure that there cannot be a pact.
Let's look forward to the Labour posters of Kemi Badenoch in Nigel Farage's top pocket at the next election.
Madeleine, we've talked a lot about Reform UK, and of course there will be conversations in the Conservative Party as well as the Labour Party about what is happening with Reform. Is there a danger, though, perhaps for the Conservatives in particular, that if they try to out-reform Reform, what they end up doing is alienating all of the voters that turned away from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats at the last election? And we did see a vast number of voters turn to the Lib Dems.
I suppose it depends what you mean by out-reform, because, for example, one of the reasons for great public dissatisfaction has been the levels of immigration that nobody voted for in successive elections. People tried to vote against it and they ended up getting higher and higher immigration for many, many years. Reform is saying we want lower numbers. Now, that is centrism. That's a very anodyne opinion. It's just that Tories, and to a lesser extent, but still to a certain extent, Labour, don't really have a leg to stand on this systemic issue. So in that respect, I think they need to out-reform if you want to call it that, but frankly they just need to be more credible on an issue that means a lot to people. But you're absolutely right that if they And that's why I think Nigel Farage was very sensible to distance himself from Tommy Robinson, because there will be sort of moderate Tory voters in the Shire constituencies who could be tempted, but there also could be people that might be more tempted towards the Lib Dems, as you say.
Nick, we are having, I think, a speech from Ed Davey tomorrow as well as Kemi Badenoch. It must be the season of speeches. What is it, a new year or something?
Well,
Still
that's
in that
right.
place, aren't we?
I mean, Ed Davey's election campaign was defined by those stunts. You'll remember them well. I think you covered some of them. And those stunts were designed to highlight big issues for Ed Davey. And one of the really big ones was care. Care for younger people needing care, care for older people. It is dear to his heart because he cares for his son, he cared for his mother, and he cared, I believe, for one of his grandparents. But interestingly, Ed Davey tomorrow, in the last few minutes, we've heard about what he's going to be saying, is going to be pivoting to an issue that was a big theme in their manifesto, but that didn't get a huge amount of attention, and that is the European Union. And what is he going to say? I'm sure you'll all love to hear this. Basically, the Prime Minister should rip up our deal with the EU and form a customs union with the European Union. How about that?
Well,
You
that is not the
astonished me.
position of the Labour government, and you know, maybe Ed Davey should stick to bungee jumping there, because that's not going to happen under this Labour government.
Now, look, I think we better let Alex take back control. Oh, there we go, off the show.
Nick, to quote a phrase. Thank you very much, Nick, and to our panel for this evening. And now back to today's Middle Eastern peace deal. Let's talk to Moshe Emilio Lavi, whose brother-in-law, Omri Miram, was taken captive by Hamas on October the 7th in 2023. The last evidence that Omri's family, including his two small children, received showing that he was alive was a video released by Hamas back in April last year. Moshe, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
First, I want to ask what your thoughts and feelings were when you heard news of this ceasefire deal start to emerge and then the confirmation.
Thank you for having me. To be honest, because since May we've been on the verge of a deal several times. We tried, in our family at least, to keep expectations low. We didn't want to be too optimistic. We've been told several times that we are within hours from an agreement, and we weren't. So for me, I try to make sure that we give the girls, my nieces, the understanding that nothing is going on around them, even though we're having so much activity. And today we received the news that a deal was brokered, and I hope it will lead to a comprehensive deal, a second phase and a third phase.
We are seeing pictures of your brother-in-law and his family now. You mentioned your nieces, his children, and of course his wife. How are they?
My sister Lishai, she's a true lioness, a heroine. She's been conducting herself amazingly since October 7th. She's a survivor of the attack, and yet she's been advocating tirelessly for Omri, for all the hostages. Yesterday she met Prime Minister Netanyahu with other representatives of families, and gave her input, making sure he understands that there can't be only one phase to this agreement. This needs to be followed up. And so she's doing that. She's a mother as well to two children who, at least one of them was old enough to have the trauma, have the memories from what happened on October 7th. She was woken up with guns pointed at her face. She's a mother, and she's fighting for her husband to return home. And I'm there for her as a shield. The entire family's there for her.
You mentioned it yourself. Over the course of the last 15 months, you've been close to this before and then back again. This kind of, one can only imagine, the emotional roller coaster that you and your family have been through over that period. Lise Doucette mentioned at the very beginning, today's news offers a sort of cautious hope. How would you describe the feeling that you have now about what might come next?
I want to stress first, I'm so happy for families who will see their loved ones return, hopefully even already next week. We're there. All hostages families are one big family. We've been through so much in the past 15 months that we come so close. Yesterday in Tel Aviv, we held a vigil together with the hope for a deal. It was such an emotional evening for all of us. But at the same time, so many are going to be left behind after the first phase, and that
including your brother-in-law,
most
presumably,
likely,
but
most
we
likely,
don't know.
yeah. We don't have the details of the agreement yet, and it's unclear who is going to be released, etc. But presumably, he's not going to be released, and so for us, there is some joy to see families reunited. but there is also the continuous pain, agony and concern that Omri is still going to be there. Every day in captivity is making him being under a life-threatening situation. Everyone is humanitarian at this point. 467 days in captivity, under duress, under torture, deprived of food, water, sanitation, you name it.
Moshi, thank you. Lisa, there are so many stories of the people who have been so directly affected by what has happened over the last 15 months. On this day, on this significant and important day, when people will be thinking, what next? What might this mean? What do you take away from this moment after so much pain and suffering?
Well, I think for Moshe, we feel for your agony. 98 hostages are said to be still in Gaza. 36 are known to be dead, and so it's just their remains coming. They will hope tonight that this deal goes to the second phase, because that's his hope for his loved one to come home. And so they will be hoping against hope that the pressure that's been put on all sides in this negotiation, President Trump's team, who will now be in the main driving seat, the Qataris and the Egyptians, they have formed a committee to oversee the implementation of this deal. There'll be other players. David Lammy, we saw, the Foreign Secretary, had made this trip very recently. He's just back from the Middle East. There will be a lot of people moving together to ensure that this is coming over the line. There's already reports in the Israeli media that the far right in Israel is understanding that President Trump is not the person. The centre-left Haaretz is saying not the saviour they expected. He has emphasised he wants the hostages to come home. All the hostages will only come home if this deal goes to the end, if the war ends. And that is what Palestinians are hoping for tonight and what many Israelis are hoping for tonight and beyond.
Thank you so very much. And Moshi, thank you so very much on coming in and talking to our Newsnight viewers today about your own experience. And of course, you can keep up with everything, all the developments in that across the BBC News website. And you can also find out what's in tomorrow's papers if you look on the BBC News channel and BBC News Online. But that is it from Broadcasting House in London. Adam Fleming is here tomorrow. Until then, thanks for watching. Sleep well and good night.